It was a crisp, overcast morning in Washington, D.C., and the tension in the air was palpable. Karoline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, had just finished her early briefing with the president and was heading towards her office. The previous few weeks had been chaotic, and Karoline, as always, had managed to hold her ground amidst the media firestorms and relentless scrutiny. But today, something felt different. Something was brewing beneath the surface, and she could sense it. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from her trusted colleague, Ryan, who worked in the Office of Communications. The message was short but to the point. "You saw Jeffries' speech yesterday, right? He's getting bolder, Karoline. We need to act fast." Hakeem Jeffries, the House Minority Leader, had been on the offensive recently, making aggressive statements about the current administration. He was outspoken in his criticisms of President Trump's policies, and his rise in power had garnered significant attention within the Democratic Party. Jeffries had made it clear that he was ready to challenge the very core of Trump's legacy, using every opportunity to push the narrative that the country needed change, his version of change. But Karoline knew that Jeffries wasn't just a politician she could ignore. He had the potential to become a serious threat to the Republicans' control of the narrative. What worried Karoline most was his growing influence in the media, where he was increasingly seen as the face of the opposition. His recent speech, delivered with passionate fervor, had solidified his position as a formidable opponent to the Trump administration. Ryan's message lingered in Karoline's mind as she walked to her office. "We need to act fast." But how? The White House had been working diligently to ensure that the administration's message was being heard, loud and clear. Yet Jeffries had a knack for hijacking the media cycles, spinning his critiques in a way that made the president's team look defensive and out of touch. The White House needed a plan. But not just any plan, it had to be bold. It had to be something that would not only silence Jeffries but make him realize that his position in politics was precarious. Karoline sat at her desk and stared at the message again. A sudden thought crossed her mind. What if she could turn the tables on Jeffries, using his own words against him? It was risky, but Karoline was never one to shy away from a challenge. She was known for her sharp wit and strategic thinking, and this would require both. But the payoff could be enormous. She started drafting a response for her upcoming press briefing. The usual talking points were there. The administration's accomplishments, the president's unwavering commitment to the American people, the strength of the economy under Trump's leadership. But there was something missing, something that would grab everyone's attention. As Karoline brainstormed, a bold idea began to take shape. She could use Jeffries' own rhetoric to expose his hypocrisy, to undermine his credibility, and to cast doubt on his ability to lead. But it had to be done carefully. Any misstep and it could backfire, giving Jeffries even more ammunition to use against the president. She clicked open her laptop and pulled up the transcript of Jeffries' recent speech. She scanned through the paragraphs, looking for the key phrases, the moments that she could twist to her advantage. Jeffries had made some strong claims, talking about unity, fairness, and the need for a new direction in the country. But Karoline knew that beneath the surface of his words lay a deeper, more dangerous agenda. "Ryan's right," she muttered to herself. "We need to act fast, and we need to do it in a way that shakes up the entire narrative." As Karoline crafted her response, she realized that her strategy had to be more than just words. It had to be an all-out assault on Jeffries' character and his credibility. She would target his inconsistencies, his questionable alliances, and his motives. Karoline wasn't just going to defend the administration, she was going to expose Jeffries for what he really was, a politician who said one thing and did another. She knew that this would be her moment to shine or fail spectacularly. There was no middle ground. She needed to take this opportunity to redefine the conversation, to turn the media's attention away from Jeffries' attacks on the president and towards his own flaws. Karoline was about to make a bold move, one that could very well end Hakeem Jeffries' political career. The White House press room was buzzing with reporters preparing for another high-stakes briefing. Karoline Leavitt stood behind the podium, her composure unshaken despite the chaotic storm of media attention. She knew that today's briefing would be different. Today, she wasn't just going to stick to the usual talking points. She was going to make a statement. One that would not only change the conversation but send shockwaves through the political landscape. As the clock ticked closer to the scheduled start time, Karoline took a deep breath and adjusted the microphone. Her eyes scanned the room, meeting the gazes of several reporters who had already prepared their questions. She had no intention of letting any of them catch her off guard today. She was ready. The room fell silent as the briefing began. Karoline's voice was calm but firm as she greeted the press, thanking them for their attendance. She started with the standard updates addressing the administration's latest initiatives and successes. The media cameras flashed, but Karoline was focused, her mind sharp and alert as she prepared to move into the real purpose of the briefing. Then it came, the moment she had been waiting for. A reporter from CNN, Michael Cooper, raised his hand. Karoline, yesterday, Hakeem Jeffries delivered a speech where he called for a new direction in America. He made some strong criticisms of President Trump's policies, specifically on healthcare and immigration. What is the White House's response to these claims? Karoline smiled inwardly. This was it. This was her opening. She adjusted her stance, leaning slightly forward, and spoke with deliberate confidence. Thank you for the question, Michael. Let me first address the fact that Hakeem Jeffries has been quite vocal in his criticism of the president and his policies. But let's be clear here, while Mr. Jeffries likes to position himself as a champion for unity and fairness, his track record tells a very different story. The reporters leaned forward, sensing the shift in tone. Karoline wasn't going to dodge the question, she was going to confront Jeffries head-on. Mr. Jeffries talks a lot about fairness, but his actions in Congress tell a different story, Karoline continued. For years, he's voted against the very policies that have helped countless Americans. He's voted against tax cuts that put more money in the pockets of working families. He's voted against border security measures that keep our communities safe. And yet, he has the audacity to stand before the American people and claim that he wants a new direction. A few reporters scribbled notes furiously while others exchanged curious glances. Karoline had just set the stage for something much bigger. I'm not here to defend the president's record, that speaks for itself. But what I will say is that Hakeem Jeffries has no credibility when it comes to leading this country. He has failed to deliver for the American people time and time again. And now he wants to pretend that he's the solution to all of our problems? I think not. The room was silent for a moment. Karoline had just delivered her first blow. But she wasn't done. Let's talk about his hypocrisy for a second, Karoline added, her voice gaining intensity. Mr. Jeffries likes to claim he's a voice for the people, yet he's taken millions in campaign donations from the very special interest groups he now claims to oppose. He's cozy with corporate donors while pretending to be the champion of the working class. That's the reality of Hakeem Jeffries, a politician who says one thing and does another. A murmur spread through the room. Karoline's words were cutting deep, and she could see that the reporters were beginning to take notice. But she wasn't about to stop. She had planned this carefully, and now it was time to deliver the final blow. Let's not forget his connections to radical left-wing organizations. Hakeem Jeffries has aligned himself with some of the most divisive voices in American politics. People who don't believe in law and order, people who are more interested in tearing down our institutions than actually making the country better. And yet, this is the man who wants to lecture us on what's best for the American people. Karoline paused for a moment, letting her words sink in. This isn't about policy disagreements, she continued. This is about a fundamental difference in values. The president believes in putting America first. Mr. Jeffries, on the other hand, is willing to sell out the American people for power and influence. And let me tell you, that's a game the American people aren't going to play. She could feel the energy in the room shift. Karoline had struck at the heart of Jeffries' political persona. His credibility, his values, and his motivations. The reporters were now all but hanging on her every word, eager to see what would come next. One of the reporters from Fox News, Lisa Turner, raised her hand. Karoline, are you suggesting that Hakeem Jeffries' political career is coming to an end? Is this something the White House is actively working toward? Karoline's gaze sharpened. She smiled, a quiet confidence radiating from her. What I'm saying is that the American people are tired of politicians like Hakeem Jeffries, who promise change but only bring division. The truth is, his rhetoric and his actions have caught up with him. And as we've seen time and time again, the truth has a way of coming out. I wouldn't be surprised if we're witnessing the beginning of the end of his political career. The room was electric. The reporters had been waiting for this moment, for Karoline to take the gloves off and make her move. She had done it. She had launched a full-scale assault on Hakeem Jeffries, and now the media cycle would be hers. The White House press briefing was over, but Karoline Leavitt's bold words were still echoing across the media. By the time she returned to her office, the phones were already ringing off the hook, and the inbox was flooded with messages. The reporters were clamoring for more details, and social media was ablaze with reactions to her powerful takedown of Hakeem Jeffries. It was only a matter of hours before the first signs of the fallout began to show. The media, usually quick to jump on the latest scandal or controversy, had found their new target. Karoline's strategic dismantling of Jeffries had been swift and brutal, and now it was all anyone could talk about. Headlines across news networks proclaimed variations of, "Leavitt slams Jeffries? Is this the end of his political career?" At first, the Democrats tried to downplay Karoline's remarks, but that didn't last long. Within a day, Jeffries himself was forced to respond. His press secretary issued a statement calling Karoline's attack reckless and misleading, but the damage had already been done. Jeffries found himself on the defensive, scrambling to explain away the very issues Karoline had so effectively brought into the public eye. Jeffries was no stranger to criticism. After all, he had been the target of many attacks from Republicans throughout his political career. But what made this situation different was the sheer precision of Karoline's assault. She hadn't just poked holes in his rhetoric, she had exposed the hypocrisy at the core of his political persona. The contradictions in his policies, his relationships with special interest groups, and his alignment with controversial figures were now front and center, forcing Jeffries into damage control mode. As the day wore on, news outlets began to report on a flurry of internal Democratic Party meetings. Word was spreading that some of Jeffries' colleagues were privately concerned about his future in leadership. His recent rise within the Democratic ranks had seemed unstoppable, but now it appeared that the White House had found a chink in his armor. Behind closed doors, members of the Democratic Party began to whisper. Was it time for a new leader? Was Hakeem Jeffries the right person to take them into the 2024 election? Karoline's words had planted seeds of doubt, and though Jeffries would never openly admit it, he knew that his grip on power had been shaken. For Karoline, the next few days were a whirlwind of press coverage and follow-up questions. She had anticipated a backlash, but the intensity of the response was greater than she had expected. Still, she remained unflappable. This was the kind of challenge she thrived on. In the midst of the chaos, she kept her focus on the bigger picture. Jeffries' political career was on the line, and every word she spoke only tightened the noose around him. As the weekend approached, Karoline was preparing for another round of press interactions when she received a call from Ryan. His tone was serious. "Karoline, there's something you need to see. It's a new ad from Jeffries' campaign." Karoline's heart skipped a beat. She knew that Jeffries had been preparing for his own counterattack, but an ad campaign? This could be big. Ryan sent over the ad, and Karoline watched it with keen eyes. The ad was a direct response to her press briefing, featuring clips of Jeffries speaking passionately about his vision for the future of the country. He had positioned himself as the leader who could unite Americans across party lines, someone who could restore integrity to the political system. The ad painted him as a man of principle, someone who stood above the partisan bickering and personal attacks. But there was something about the ad that didn't sit right with Karoline. She could see that it was well-produced, but it lacked the authenticity that Jeffries had once prided himself on. The smooth rhetoric, the perfectly timed cuts, it all felt too polished, too rehearsed. In fact, it looked almost like a desperate attempt to salvage his reputation in the wake of Karoline's assault. Ryan's voice crackled through the line. "I think they're trying to get ahead of the narrative. They know they're losing ground, Karoline. This ad is their way of pushing back." Karoline nodded slowly, absorbing the information. This was exactly the kind of move she had expected. Jeffries was trying to regain control of the narrative, to paint himself as the calm, steady voice of reason. But Karoline knew that the truth was out there, the cracks in his facade were beginning to show. The question now was, how could they strike again and solidify the narrative that Jeffries' political career was indeed on the brink? As the days passed, Karoline Leavitt's calculated move against Hakeem Jeffries continued to reverberate throughout the political world. Jeffries' campaign was struggling to regain control of the narrative, and his leadership within the Democratic Party was becoming increasingly uncertain. The tension within his ranks was palpable, and whispers of a potential challenger to his position as House Minority Leader began to surface. It was clear that Jeffries was in a political corner, and Karoline knew this was her moment to push harder. The White House needed to go on the offensive again to ensure that the narrative stuck. With Jeffries already on the defensive, any further public missteps from him could seal his fate. Karoline and her team huddled in the war room, reviewing all the available information on Jeffries. They meticulously combed through every speech, every vote, every controversy. They needed to identify his weakest points and amplify them. The goal was clear: to further expose the cracks in Jeffries' armor and force the Democrats to question whether he was the right leader to face the Republicans in 2024. "Here's what we need to do," Karoline said, her voice calm but determined. "We need to tie Jeffries' rhetoric directly to the reality of his actions. He talks a big game about unity, but when it comes to actually delivering for the American people, he's been nothing but a roadblock." Ryan, her communications director, nodded. "We've got the footage from his speeches and we've already identified key contradictions. Let's run with that. Let's show the American people that Jeffries is not the man he claims to be." Over the next few days, Karoline and her team worked tirelessly on a new series of statements, social media posts, and strategic leaks to the press. The aim was to undermine Jeffries' credibility further by highlighting his numerous flip-flops on critical issues and pointing out how he had consistently voted in ways that contradicted his public persona. Karoline's first move was a bold tweet targeting Jeffries' contradictory stance on healthcare reform. Hakeem Jeffries claims to support universal healthcare, but when it came time to vote, he sided with the insurance companies. #hypocrisy in action, #America deserves better. The tweet quickly went viral, with countless replies and retweets from both conservative supporters and frustrated progressives who were beginning to see the contradictions in Jeffries' policies. The White House then released a well-timed statement that directly attacked Jeffries' record. Hakeem Jeffries may claim to stand for the American people, but his voting record tells a different story. He has consistently chosen special interests over the interests of everyday Americans. His hypocrisy is now on full display. But it wasn't just Karoline's words that were having an impact. The White House communications team had started circulating footage of Jeffries from just a few months earlier, where he had promised to fight for healthcare reform that would help working-class Americans. The clips juxtaposed his speech against the reality of his votes, showing the stark contrast between his promises and his actions. The media began to pick up on the story, and soon, Hakeem Jeffries was once again thrust into the spotlight, but not in the way he had hoped. As the scrutiny intensified, Jeffries struggled to respond. His defense was weak and the cracks in his credibility grew wider. Every attempt he made to regain control of the narrative seemed to backfire, reinforcing Karoline's points rather than disproving them. But Karoline knew that the White House couldn't rest on its laurels. She had to keep the pressure up. She knew that Jeffries' greatest strength had always been his ability to present himself as a unifier, as someone who could bring both sides of the aisle together. But now she had to expose that image for the illusion it truly was. At her next press briefing, Karoline stood at the podium with a sense of quiet confidence. The room was filled with eager reporters, all hoping to catch her off guard, but Karoline was prepared. She knew exactly how to deal with the barrage of questions that would come her way. A reporter from MSNBC, David Jones, was the first to ask Karoline, "There are reports that some members of the Democratic Party are considering moving away from Hakeem Jeffries as their leader. Do you think this is a possibility? And if so, what does that mean for the upcoming election?" Karoline didn't hesitate. "David, let me be clear. I think the American people deserve a leader who is consistent, who is principled, and who stands by their word. Hakeem Jeffries has shown time and time again that he's not that leader. The fact that members of his own party are now questioning his leadership is proof that his hypocrisy and his failure to deliver for the American people are catching up with him." She paused, letting her words sink in. "This isn't just about politics. This is about leadership. And right now, it's clear that Jeffries is not the leader the Democrats need to move forward. If he can't even hold his own party together, how can he possibly lead the country? The American people are watching, and they are starting to see the cracks in his facade." The room fell silent. Karoline's words had once again struck a nerve, and this time, it felt like Jeffries' political career was hanging by a thread. The media, who had once considered him an untouchable rising star, was now beginning to question whether he could weather the storm. Karoline knew the next step was crucial. The White House needed to keep the pressure on, driving the narrative home that Jeffries was not only unfit to lead but also a liability to the Democratic Party's future. The political landscape was shifting, and as the days passed, the pressure on Hakeem Jeffries only grew stronger. His once solid position as House Minority Leader now seemed precarious, and whispers of a possible leadership challenge were echoing louder within the Democratic Party. Karoline Leavitt had orchestrated a masterful campaign against him, and the White House was determined to finish what they had started. Karoline knew that Jeffries' campaign was scrambling for answers, trying to recover from the relentless wave of scrutiny that had engulfed him. It was time to land the final blow, the one that would truly seal his fate. She had one more powerful weapon left in her arsenal: a live television interview. Karoline's team had been working on a strategy for weeks, preparing for a moment when they could expose Jeffries' hypocrisy once again. The plan was simple. Set up a highly publicized debate where Jeffries would be forced to defend his actions and his record, all under the spotlight. The White House had carefully orchestrated the timing of the interview, knowing that any slip-up from Jeffries would be devastating to his credibility. The day of the interview arrived, and Karoline was poised for the final confrontation. Jeffries, on the other hand, looked visibly worn. The weight of the attacks against him, both from within his party and from Karoline herself, had clearly taken a toll. His usual smooth talking was now tinged with uncertainty. The set was sleek, the lights bright, and the cameras rolling. Karoline entered the studio first, exuding confidence, her every move calculated. She was ready. When Jeffries walked in moments later, his demeanor was markedly different. He was tense, his usual composure replaced with a look of discomfort. The audience could sense it immediately. This wasn't the same Jeffries who had been so confident in his rise to power. The debate began with a series of standard questions, but Karoline didn't waste any time. She dove straight into the heart of the matter. "Mr. Jeffries," Karoline began, her voice calm but piercing, "you've been on the record many times claiming that you are the voice of unity for the Democratic Party. Yet, your actions tell a different story. You've flip-flopped on crucial policy issues, and you've repeatedly sided with corporate interests instead of the American people. How do you reconcile this with your claim to be the leader of a progressive movement?" The question hung in the air. Jeffries shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his jaw tightening. He was clearly caught off guard. "Well, Karoline," he began, but Karoline didn't let him finish. "Do you stand by your vote on the healthcare bill, which left millions of Americans without affordable care, or do you regret siding with the insurance companies?" she interrupted, her tone sharp. The audience gasped. It was a direct hit, the same issue Karoline had raised days earlier in her tweet, and now Jeffries was being forced to address it in front of millions of viewers. Jeffries fumbled for words. "I think we need to understand the broader context." "The broader context?" Karoline interjected, her voice rising with controlled intensity. "Let me make this clear for you, Mr. Jeffries. The American people don't want context, they want results. They want a leader who will stand up for them, not for lobbyists, not for special interests, but for hardworking families. You failed to do that." Karoline's words landed like a punch. Jeffries, struggling to maintain his composure, tried to deflect, but it was evident that his confidence had shattered. The cracks in his leadership were no longer just visible, they were glaring. The interview continued with Karoline methodically dismantling Jeffries' record, holding him accountable for every policy flip and every failure to live up to his promises. Each time Jeffries tried to pivot or deflect, Karoline turned the conversation back to his contradictions. She expertly controlled the narrative, never letting him regain any ground. The final moment came when Karoline asked, "Mr. Jeffries, given your inability to follow through on your promises and your failure to unite your own party, do you believe you are the right leader to represent the Democratic Party in the 2024 elections?" The question hit its mark. Jeffries hesitated, his face betraying his inner turmoil. He knew deep down that the question was no longer just rhetorical. It was a challenge to his very legitimacy as a leader. The camera zoomed in on his face as he stammered, searching for an answer that would salvage his dignity. But it was too late. The damage had been done. The interview ended shortly after that, but the fallout would continue for days. As Karoline walked off the stage, she knew that she had done what she set out to do. Jeffries' political career was hanging by a thread, and no amount of polished speeches or carefully crafted ads could undo the damage she had caused. In the days that followed, news outlets were dominated by analysis of the interview. Pundits and political analysts dissected every moment, every exchange. The consensus was clear: Jeffries had been exposed and his leadership was now in serious question. Democrats began to look elsewhere for a new leader, one who could unite the party and take them into the 2024 elections with a clear vision. Karoline's victory was not just in defeating Jeffries, it was in solidifying her position as one of the most formidable figures in American politics. Her calculated attack had not only toppled a political leader but had also reinforced the White House's dominance in shaping the narrative. Hakeem Jeffries, once seen as a rising star, was now facing an uncertain future while Karoline Leavitt stood firmly in control of the political stage. For Karoline, this was just the beginning. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. With her eyes firmly set on the future, she knew that this victory would only pave the way for greater challenges ahead, and she was more than ready to face them.